I want to give a shiur in many ways on a very mysterious topic. It's a very profound topic, actually. And really, in the end, it's very difficult to reach some type of clarity on this topic. But I'm going to try at least to give some type of understanding of what is going on. Before I begin, this year should be a blessing and a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Ruvain and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf ben Tzvi Hirsch, Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf, Shmuel Ruvain ben Regina for Refuah Shlema, and for Esther Liba Bas Chaya, Yafa. They should have also Refuah Shlema. Shlomo Leib Ben Fega. Right. The schus of the Shia should go for their benefit in all manner. The topic that I want to talk about tonight, like I said, is a very difficult topic to understand, as we will see. We know that we are commanded to do mitzvahs, and it comes with a reward that takes place in Olam Haba. Obviously, that's where it comes. It takes place. And in fact, that's really the purpose of creation, is that mankind should receive a reward in Olam Haba. And really, when you really want to think about that, the idea of Olam Haba is infinite bliss eternally. It is obviously an existence or a situation where it's exceedingly blissful. It's infinitely blissful. Something which we really have no idea of the magnitude of the experience. And what is so amazing about it is that eternal, never ends. You know, it's funny when you think about what does it mean never to end? It means that even if 100 billion years have passed, right? We know that the world now is 5,785. So could you imagine if the world was 100 billion years? And imagine that Olam Haba would be 100 billion years. Can you imagine having eternal bliss for 100 billion years? Yet if you think about that, since it's eternal, that 100 billion years is as if it never started. Because compared to the rest of eternity, it is absolutely insignificant. Yet it's 100 billion years. So you can't wrap your mind around what the concept of eternity is. Yet Olam Haba is a place that is eternal with infinite bliss. So could you imagine what the Rabbanu Shalom has in store for those people that do His will? You see, the question is, we know that in order to get Olam Haba, there is a condition. And that condition is that you have to do Ratzon HaBoreh, which is His will. That means you have to earn Olam Haba. It's not a gift. It's a reward, you see. So the question then is, wait a minute, why do I have to earn Olam Haba? Obviously the Rebbe Shem is capable of giving me Olam Haba without having to work for it. Yet for some reason the Rebbe Shem decided that in order to enjoy this experience, which we know is not comprehensible, in order to enjoy it, you need to have done His will. Now you may say, well, that was His choice, which is of course true. Now, what is that called? That is called Midas Hadin, the attribute of justice. What does that mean? What is justice really? Justice is you get what you did. Nothing more, nothing less. If you do good, whatever that is, you are rewarded. If you do bad, you are punished. That's justice. And you are rewarded and punished in the exact proportion to what you did. That is a world based on justice. In other words, to be rewarded is justice, and to be punished is justice. It means that you are responsible and you receive that which you did. That's what it means. And that's called dinam. And God created the world using the attribute of justice, which means if you want Olam Haba, you need to work for it. You need to do that which is required, or the task which God has set aside. You need to do that task. Okay, so this is what's called the premise of Olam Hazeh, of this world, which means that your act only is going to get you Olam Haba. If you don't do the will of God, then you could still get Olam Haba, but then you have to also be involved in justice. What is justice if you don't do the will of God, which means sinning? It means you have to undo what you did. You see, so that's justice. No matter what, no matter how you look at it, you need to be responsible for your Olam Haba. If you do good, you get Olam Haba, the reward that's set aside. If you do bad, if you sin, go against His will, or other acts of evil and so on, since you did sin, you have to undo the sin. And that's also justice. In other words, you are responsible for the acts and the effect of those acts that you caused. That's what justice really is. So the question is, wait a minute. Why doesn't God just give it to you as a gift? Right? He should give it to you as a gift. You know, I don't have to work for it. Imagine God creates you and says, I want to give you a gift. What is that gift? It's an infinite reward, right? Infinite pleasure, infinite bliss. And it'll go on for eternity, which of course God can guarantee. Now, why would we think that the Rebbe Shem should do this? To give Olam Haba as a gift? And the answer is because God claims as part of His attributes that He is chesed. Okay? That He is the absolute epitome of chesed, kindness. Well, I ask you, which is kinder? To give me reward that I haven't done or earned, but it's chesed. Chesed means to do good to somebody without any claim for that goodness. In other words, it's purely in the mind of the giver. The receiver has done nothing to earn it. That's chesed, an act of kindness, and so on. So God claims to be infinitely chesed, which He is. So if that's the case, so why isn't He giving it to you for free? Powerful question. Not only that, I'll tell you something interesting. When you think about it, what is the basic principle of this entire creation? Can we nail it down to one idea? And the answer is yes. Now, people will never think of this idea, that I can tell you now. But it's the idea, as far as I'm concerned, right, that is really the principle of what determines the type of creation God will make. What is that idea? And really, in the end, it's a pasuk. Vayar Elokim in Bereshis. And God saw, right, that the entire world that He created, Toiv Ma'id, was very good. Now that's God saying that, not we. He says that His act of creation can be described with an adjective called good, Toiv Ma'id. You know, not Toiv, good, but the best good. That's an interesting concept. That would mean that the original blueprint of the Bria was to make a creation that is Toiv Ma'id. And God saw that He had achieved that. That's what it would mean. But what is Toiv? We don't really know. But I want to tell you something interesting. When you look at this creation and you want to describe it in one word, that word is Toiv Ma'id. It's excellent. In fact, it's the best thing that God could make if He wanted to make this. Now, what does that mean? Well, Toiv is a very relative term, obviously. You know, it's like they say, one man's poison is another man's medicine, and so on, you see. But there is a generic concept to Toiv, okay? So if you ask me, well, what is Toiv that God intended? I will say the following, that God, His idea of Toiv is the greatest gift, really, that He could give you. What is that? It's nothing that you think. It's not health, and believe me, these are all incredible things. It's not wealth. It's not pleasure. What is it? The greatest gift that God has bestowed on you is existence, to be, right? The worst thing He could have done is not bring you into existence at all. Think about that. Therefore, God decided that He would create a creation that is the greatest thing that He could make. What is that? It is a creation that has a phenomenon called existence or being, right? And God created the phenomenon, the concept of being, to be, existence itself. That is Toiv. So it comes out that the first thing that God created, which is interesting, what is the first thing He created? He created the fabric, the basis of all creation, which is Toiv. The first thing that God had to make is, what is that idea that I want to embed in everything, that I want to be the bedrock of everything? And the answer is, that idea is called Toiv, good, right? So if you think about it, the first thing that God created is the basic principle of all creation, and that is the concept, the phenomenon called goodness. All right. And when we look at it and we ask ourselves, well, what is that phenomenon? And the answer is existence is that phenomenon. And after that, everything follows. All the different dimensions, the different worlds, and so on, because they all have existence. And then, of course, God created what type of existence are they? How do they interact with each other? How do they develop? Everything else follows. But everything else follows from the word called existence. So there you are. So we would ask the Rabban Shem that if this world is created from the concept called, using the concept called Toiv, I would imagine that the greatest Toiv is to experience the greatest existence without having to work. Why do I have to expend energy in order to experience Toiv? It's a very valid question. In other words, God claims that He's Chesed, infinite Chesed, and the world is based on Toiv. So that creates a tremendous mystery. So why do I have to work for Olam Haba? Not only that, there is a real bad downside to the concept of work or justice or din. What is that? That if you don't do the job that God wants you to do, you risk everything. You don't create Olam Haba. You don't get Olam Haba because you didn't earn it. You never worked for it. So if the world runs through justice, which means you have to earn it, and you didn't earn it because you didn't do anything for it, you don't get it. So there's a tremendous risk by having to work for your Olam Haba. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you don't get as much as you could have gotten had you not worked for it, right? Because you only get, and that's what justice says, you only get exactly what you earned. Nothing more, nothing less. Because if you got more or less than what you did, that's not just. That's not din. You see. So the second problem with having to work is you may not deserve the greatest amount of Olam Haba. It may be severely diminished. And believe me, by many, many people, it is severely diminished. And of course, there are many shurim that could be talked about that. What determines the amount of Olam Haba and so on that a person gets? But clearly it's dependent on justice. So for those two reasons, there's a tremendous risk of having a world of Olam Haba based on your work, your effort. There you are. So that question is a very difficult question to answer, and certainly for the ideas that I have presented. How do we begin to answer that? Well, Chazal do answer it. The Ramchal answers it. He tries to anyway. But it's really in many ways unintelligible. It's not sufficient of an answer, as I will point out. He answers, and the Gemara says this, that there is a feeling or an experience, if you want to call it that if you do not earn Olam Haba, instead you get it as a gift. Remember, that gift is eternal and it's infinite bliss. You will experience something called Nahama Diksufa, bread of shame. Nahama means bread, Kisufa means shame. You experience something called bread of shame if you do not earn the Olam Haba, right? Why is that? Well, what is Nahama Diksufa? Although it's not talked about much, the most damaging there are certain emotions which are extremely damaging to the human psyche. One of them is the feeling of inferiority. Okay, and what that produces. There are other feelings which are very damaging. The feeling of guilt, and so on. The feeling of grief, without going through all the negative emotions. But one of the most debilitating feelings of all is the concept called shame. Right. Shame, if experienced by a person, in many ways, is devastating. To be shamed, especially constantly, is a terrible experience to go through. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is shame, really? And the answer to that is, shame is when you recognize that there's an aspect of you that is vulnerable, that's not what you think you were. So you are ashamed. You see, in other words, when something you recognize is pointed out to you that it's negative, then you experience the emotion of shame, and so on, you see, you know. And there are obviously many examples and so on, you know. If you do something wrong, imagine a child does something wrong, and the parent screams at the child and says, "What are you doing? You are no good for nothing." Now, I'm not going into if what the parent did was correct. Forget about that. But what happens to the child? The child thinks of itself as inferior, as something wrong, as not being what they could be. They see themselves as inferior, and they are embarrassed. They are shamed. So shame is a recognition that you are not what you think you are. You are inferior, and you experience the emotion called shame. Shame is obviously very detrimental to the ego. So Chazal used the term namadik sufa, that if you receive something for eternity, for whatever length of time, constantly, and you never do anything for it, you begin to feel bad about yourself. You begin to see yourself as what? As impotent, as a nobody, as a nothing, as somebody who cannot do anything for themselves. You see, you begin to experience what is called, you're ashamed of yourself, because you basically feel that you're a nothing, a nobody, totally unproductive. The problem is that if God gives you Olam Haba, which is an unbelievable experience that we cannot even comprehend, and not only does He give it to you, but He gives you all of it. And not only does He give all of it to you, but He gives it to you for eternity, then the neshama, the soul, will experience a terrible state of extreme nothingness, inferiority. And therefore that will interfere with your experiencing any type of pleasurable state. So therefore your Olam Haba, your future world state, is completely damaging. Could you imagine experiencing that, a feeling of being nothing, being nobody, because you do nothing, because everything is done for you, everything, literally, you see? And there's nothing that you do, you have no input whatsoever, you know, which is, of course, we don't have that, but it's an experience that you can imagine. Imagine where you do nothing all day long, and everything is done for you, even though it's good, right? Even though it's pleasurable and it's blissful. But you have no input in any, not even one iota of input. What are you going to feel about yourself after a while? You feel like a nobody, a nothing. Because one of the ways that we gain ego, image, is by being productive. Because we need to convince ourselves that we are somebody, right? That's the eternal drive. we are always trying to convince ourselves that we're somebody. That's man's eternal quest, even though you don't realize that. We are always trying to assert, confirm being right. Now, I'm not going to go into the origin of that, but that's man's eternal quest. I have to feel like somebody and not like a nobody. And there are different ways of doing that. You know, one of the main ways of feeling like somebody is doing things, being productive, having achievements. Then I feel like a somebody. You see, I've accomplished. Besides that, there's also other ways of feeling like a somebody. You know, having a lot of money, you feel like somebody. Right. It's one of the reasons why everybody's after cash, besides the security and fulfillment of the needs. You know? So that's another way of feeling like somebody. And so on. So besides productivity and having money, these are two main ways of feeling like somebody. You see, another way is conquest. Why are we always trying to conquer somebody else? Because when we conquer, we control them. And when we control them, we are deluded into thinking that we're somebody. That's part of the reasons for conquest, you see. So there are clearly things that we do to give ourselves a feeling of being somebody, you see. And to be in a state of eternal rest and eternal reward, not doing a thing to influence that pleasure or whatever, will make us feel like zero. Because there's nothing that we can point to that makes them feel like somebody. That's shame. So could you imagine living eternally with shame of being a nobody while you're experiencing reward? Or why, I shouldn't say reward, while you're experiencing a gift of pleasure? So no matter how pleasure it is, you're a nobody. So it's a terrible interference, right, with the idea of experiencing. So this is not a olam haba. This type of an experience where you have bread of shame because you're constantly being receiving is the worst Gehenna for you. And it goes on forever. You see? So God decided, no, I will only give you what you deserve, means what you worked for. And if you work for it, you will feel that you have complete input into that reward. Because if you didn't work for it, I wouldn't give it to you. So obviously you feel like somebody. Because you say to yourself, listen, whatever I'm going through, I only have because I did it. I did it. Nobody else did it. You see? So in that sense, working for something removes this existential feeling called namadik sufa. That's basically what they say as an answer. But there's a lot of problems with that concept. A lot of problems with that concept, you know. One of the major problems with this concept is, wait a minute, who created the feeling of being shamed if I don't do anything? This didn't pre-exist God. God created this feeling in a human when he doesn't do anything. Who created the feeling, the potential feeling and the actual feeling of inferiority? God. So then the point is, okay, so don't create the feeling and you don't have to fix it. Like I say, if it ain't broke, don't fix. If you don't have to fix it if it ain't broke. If you don't create the feeling, the ability, the capacity of a person to feel shame if they do nothing, or the concept of inferiority, the feeling of inferiority, you don't have to fix it by making you earn it. You see? That's a very difficult question to get around. Because the whole problem arises from God. Well, guess what? Don't do it. Don't create the ability of man to feel shame. Don't create the whole phenomenon of what? Of shame at all. And he won't feel shamed by the fact that he did nothing to deserve Olam Haba. Okay, anyway. So that's what they try to answer, and that's the difficulty with that. It's very difficult to find. I have never seen an answer to this question. I don't know if there is one, really, although I am going to try to attempt to at least give some partial answer to this. But in any case, therefore, Nahamadik Sufa, bread of shame, is why God makes you earn it, which is a very important idea. Okay. Now, how do we begin to deal with this problem? Why does God have to make you work for it? This is the question. You see. So I answered what they answer. Nahamadik Sufa, bread of shame. That's why God has to make you earn it. And that is why you get only what you did. Because then you don't feel embarrassed or shamed or inferior. Because if God gives you something you did not earn, and He gives it to you eternally, you're going to feel Nahamadik Sufa, bread of shame. You are going to feel existentially like a nobody. Totally. And therefore God will therefore give you the concept of earning it to remove Nahamadik Sufa. But the truth is, as I will explain, there's something really more profound. There is a fundamental idea that God follows. And this is very important. It's called Hatova Shlema, the best good. Hatova means good. Shlema, complete, or total, or perfect. Whatever God does, He is guided by one rule. It's got to be the best. If I do chesed, it's got to be the best type of chesed that can exist. If I do rachamim, mercy, compassion, it's got to be the best, which only He is capable of. We cannot approach perfection in any of these characteristics or midas. He can, because He created these midas. So what guides Him, which is very interesting, it's got to be the best, which is, when you think about it, an incredible idea. That means each person can point to their lives. And of course, every person has complaints. Why did this happen? Why did that happen? But what I'm saying is a contradiction to what you're thinking. In the end, God will demonstrate to you why what He did to you, no matter how bad it looks to you, was the best. And guess what? In the end, you're going to say, you're right. It is the best. And thank God you did it. In many ways, I can compare it to somebody that has a tumor. So you walk over to the surgeon and say, why did you cut me up? You see, you opened me up to take out a tumor. What'd you do that for? So the surgeon will look at you and say, excuse me, if I didn't cut you up, you would never have made it. So the best thing I could do for you to extend your existence is cutting you up. That was the best. Don't you agree? And you'll say, you have a point. You're right. It would have been curtains for me. You saved my life. So under these situations or circumstances, right, which you brought to me, you saved my life. Right. That's exactly what God is going to say to you. We cannot even comprehend how He's going to do it. Because everybody's walking around loaded with complaints. Loaded. Grief. Complaints. Tarumas, as they say in Hebrew and so on. Of why did God do this to me? Why didn't I get this good thing? Why did somebody die and so on, right? We don't know why. But what God has to demonstrate to you, which is an incredible task, is that what he did to you was the best. Because that's what guides his behavior. Hatova Shlema. Right. Because God is Toiv, good, but he's not just good, he's the greatest good that can exist. And he does that to you and to everybody else. And in the end of time, he's going to prove it down to a nano item, second, whatever, right? And that's what it means in Ha'azinu. Tzadik v'yosho, ein ovel. God is righteous and he's straight, fair. V'ein ovel, and there is no evil. There is no injustice at all. We have no idea how he can possibly demonstrate that in each person's life. But I'm telling you, a fundamental principle, what God does must be Hatova Shlema, perfect good. So the question then is, wait a minute, okay, let's see how it works out. I'm going to give you a scenario. I'm going to ask you a question, right? I don't know what you're going to answer, because obviously I'm not in contact with you. But give it thought. It's very interesting. And then I will tell you what I think. Imagine, we know God appeared to Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. And he appeared to him and said, I will give you a gift, either incredible wisdom or tremendous wealth. What would you like? It's one wish. It's like the genie in the bottle, right? You freed the genie, and the genie says, I'm forever indebted. You freed me. The Aladdin and his lamp and all that stuff. Ask of me anything you want, and I will give it to you. But remember, one wish, and that wish cannot be to have more wishes. Okay. What would you wish for? It's a very interesting question. What is that which you see as vital to such an extent that you would ask the genie? Okay, let's replace it. Imagine God appears to you in a dream and he says, I like what you did or whatever, how you're conducting yourself. Ask me one wish. And since I'm God, I don't have any problem granting it to you. What would you like? I'm telling you, you'd get all kinds of answers. Right. What would you answer? Right. Some people would say tremendous wealth, tremendous fame, tremendous talents. Whatever. I would say none of those things. What would I wish for? I will tell you. I would say, the greatest thing that I could be or that I could wish for is what? Is to be a God. Right. I want to be God. I don't have to be you, but I would like to be like you. What is like you? You are omnipotent. You can do anything you want. You have no limits. And you have no dependencies on anything. Make me a God. I think that's a fair request. If God appeared to me, I don't think he is, but you never know, right? But that's what I would wish for. So if God, therefore, now we all admit that would really be the best, because you would be able to grant anything to yourself, because you're like God, right? There you are. You don't have to ask God specifically for something. If you're like God, you could do it yourself. Right? That's my wish. Anyway, it's interesting. Guess what? God did that. When he made a Jew, or even a goy, a non-Jew, when he said, your end is Olam Haba, which is the greatest good of all. Remember what I said, that God does Hatova Shlema, right? The greatest or perfect good. Well, guess what that is? To make you a God. Right. Nobody's going to debate me. That is the greatest good. So wait a minute. So I could say to God, you are guided by Hatova Shlema, the greatest good, right? Perfect good, right? So then make me, not you, but make me like you. I want to become divine. I want to become like God. So that's my request. And by the way, that's exactly what God did. Right. And with that, we begin to understand many, many different ideas. You see, now, there is a difficulty in understanding this. What do you mean God can make you a God? What does that even mean? What does it mean to be divine? To replicate God? Or in some way to be parallel to God? What does that mean? And the answer, the question, and the statement is, you cannot be God. God can do whatever He wants. I'm not going into who He really is. Atzmusoi, which I talked about on the Pesach Shiur, which I recommend everybody to listen to, because it's really in many ways a forerunner to this year, the Pesach Shiur. You know, God, not that He can't make you a God. God cannot be replicated. So how can He make you divine? The way He can make you divine is that He can allow you to possess a characteristic that only He possesses and no other being possesses. What is that? He can create. Only He can create. What does that mean? That means to bring something into existence that doesn't exist. Because basically, at least the way it appears to us, the Shekhinah, is that He doesn't have existence. He is existence. And therefore, He can impart existence to anything He wants. That is why He's omnipotent. And everything that has existence really has been imparted existence by God. And that's why it is. And we all share being in common. So the only thing that God really does, certainly we can't do it, is He can create. He can give existence to that which doesn't exist. We can't do that because we may have existence, but we are not existence per se. You see, so the first thing that God does, and that's exactly what He's going to do, the first thing that God does is He creates a neshama, a soul. But that soul, Chazal referred to it in a very interesting way. It's called chelik elekai mimal. We are part of the Shekhinah. Right. We are part of God, literally, although we don't understand what that means. But when it says chelik elekai, a part of the living God, it means that literally, we are part of the Shekhinah. So the first thing that God made us is He gave us the substance of a divine being. We don't really understand what that means. You see, in other words, we are part of the Shekhinah in a way that we cannot even comprehend. But it's a literal idea. Although we are not the Shekhinah, in some way we are of the Shekhinah. And that's basically the most I could say. You see, in fact, what's interesting is we are like a coin, heads and tails. One side of the coin is the Shekhinah, the divine presence itself, and the other side of the coin, right, is Knesset Yisrael, the nation of Israel. That's really what the neshama is. The neshama is part of the coin, and that coin has heads and tails, two sides. It has the Shekhinah on one, and then Knesset Yisrael, the nation of Israel, on the other. And what God did is He subdivided Knesset Yisrael into millions of pieces, and each of us retains that property of being part of God. And therefore, in terms of substance, right, we are part of God. And therefore, the nature of the neshama is divine. We do not understand what that means. You see, that really is the greatness of man. And now you begin to understand many ideas of what that means. For instance, it says in the Torah that God created man, which is the neshama, tzelem Elokim, the image of God. What does that mean? We don't look like God. We're not talking about a real image, but we are talking not about an image. We are talking about a likeness, right? In a certain way, we are like God. What way? Right? What I just said, that we are part of God. That is why we are tzelem Elokim. And many times, which we see, for instance, in Tehillim, on the third day, it says a very interesting pasuk, Elokim atem, you are God, and you can fall like a man. What do you mean we are like God? Right. What does that mean? Because we, in terms of substance, we are of a divine nature. Right. And that's why you find, for instance, Moshe Rabbeinu, he's called Ish Elokim. What do you mean Ish Elokim? It should just be, he's a righteous man, tzaddik, kodosh, holy man. No. He's a man, Ish Elokim. He's a godly man, right? That he exercised that property, right? And then, let me bring you another proof, which is really remarkable. What did the Nachash, the snake, how did he tempt Chava to sin? Because he told her the truth. He said, V'yisim kelokim, and you will be like God. Now, I'm not going into the fact that, he said lies in terms of, but that statement was true. In other words, if you do not listen, if you listen to what God says, or rather, if you don't listen to what God said and eat from the tree, you will be like God. But how could that be? Because he caused her to believe, that it is possible to be godlike. And he was right, because she was godlike, right? That's the neshama. In any case, what we begin to realize is that we have the likeness of God in us. But here's the problem. If we have the likeness of God in us, right, and we are now in Olam Haba, receiving 24/7 toiv, good, pleasure, and so on, and we do nothing that in any way demonstrates that we can cause, then we have tremendous shame. You see, it's a contradiction. How can I be a chelik l'kai mimal and do nothing, receive everything? I can't create. What can I do that in any way demonstrates that I'm anything? You see? So it comes out that Olam Haba is an experience of being a nobody for eternity. But wait a minute. Not only am I a somebody, I'm godlike. I'm a chelik l'kai mimal. What do you think that contradiction will lead to? And the answer is, Namadik Sufa. Shame. There you are. The origin of Namadik Sufa is because God created us with a divine nature and contradicts that in Olam Haba by allowing us to do nothing. That's Namadik Sufa. You see? That interesting? And it makes sense. That's the contradiction. You see? And it's an eternal contradiction. I mean, how long can we experience that and survive? This is a problem. Because God wanted to give us, think about that, the greatest possible experience in Olam Haba, right? We are now going to experience an absolute sense of being nobody. You see, because we do nothing. Because we are only makablim, we are only receivers. You know, even if we in some way are part of God, we do nothing to demonstrate that or to exemplify that idea. So God therefore says, the only way I could remove that idea is how? Is I have to give you some feature that only I have and only God has, a God has. You see? I need to give you a remedy not to experience being a nobody, because the contradiction leads of being a part of God and doing nothing leads to the concept of Namnik Sufa. What does God do? Now you begin to understand what is the only thing that God can do that nothing else, nobody can do, and that is to create, to bring that which doesn't exist into existence. Only God can do that. So God says, and therefore God is the only true cause. It's the only one. Because He brings it into existence. That's a true cause. Not something else that does it. So God said, I'm somehow going to create the wherewithal for you to bring something into existence that didn't exist before, and I do not insert it into your mind. What is that? Free will. Now you begin to understand. Free will, we don't know how it works. But as far as we're concerned, it's really an impossibility. But God says, "Ubachata b'chayim." He says that in the Torah, and you will choose good. What do you mean choose good? Who says I can choose anything? You do everything for me, including whatever decision I want to do. So God said, no, I'm going to create a new phenomenon, and we have no idea how He does it, where you can actually create the desire, the choice to do something. And that's called bechira, free will. You therefore become a true cause. You see, not only will I allow you to do it or give you the capacity to do it, even more, I'm going to demand that you do it, and that's the only reward I will give you. Bingo! Olam Haba that I have is totally up to me. So there it is, and therefore I'm like God. I created my own Olam Haba. You see? Which means I have to earn Olam Haba. Right? Isn't that amazing? Therefore we have to earn Olam Haba. That is the origin of Midas Hadin. Midas Hadin has to restore to us the likeness of being God, and as a result of that, we can now remove dread of shame. You see. And that we begin to understand. Now, there are many questions that we have. How does God do that? And the question is, where does Bechira lie? You should know, every single thing that happens, it's astounding. I think if we ever realized that and saw it, we'd also drop dead in shock. Everything that happens, everything, except one, is willed by God. Except we don't see it. For instance, if I go like that and I lift my hand, who did it? So I think it's me, but it's not. Because who gave existence to my arm to even rise? God. Right. Except I don't see it. God's concealment of Himself in every single activity ever done is astounding. You see. Then where's my free will? My free will is I decide I want to lift my arm. That's it. That God did not put in my mind. The decision to raise my arm is not from God, it's from me. You see, the decision to go to shul, the decision to do a mitzvah, or the decision to harm is not put there by God. Now, we don't understand how that works. Because where did it come from? I can't create that decision. So how does it appear? We don't know. But we do know that it's mine and only mine and not the input of God. Or else there would be no bechira. It wouldn't make any sense. So therefore, the only thing that we do is to decide yes or no. Do I want to do this act or I don't want to do this act? You see? And we therefore are the true cause. And that is a divine act. You see? Now, whether I lift my arm or whether I do what I want to do, that's no longer up to me. God has now input the existence of me being able to do this. You see, there is no bechira in the action itself. There is only free will in what? In the decision to do the act. It's a very important principle. I know it's hard to believe that nothing happens without God's input. Nothing. Why? Because we cannot control existence. I cannot create existence on anything. So how can I get anything done? It's like you tell a guy, you just made $1 million in the stock market. What are you talking about? You made nothing. You cannot even allow yourself to exist and live in the next nanosecond. You don't exist without God saying, be, be, be. So how in the world did you make $1 million on the stock market? You don't realize how ludicrous this all is. So God does an unbelievable job of concealing his relationship to all our actions and our very existence. But there's one thing that he does not have input in, or else we wouldn't have free will. Because he wants us to be a true cause, and therefore we will exhibit a true likeness of God, where we will cause the action that now registers as a merit for Olam Haba. Right. And therefore, bingo, we're in Olam Haba for eternity, and the only reason why we're in Olam Haba at whatever length or action is only because of us. God does not make us do mitzvahs. And therefore, there is no namadik sufa. You see? Isn't that incredible? So the fact that there's hatova shlema makes God want us to be like him. And that's the wish that we would ask for if God said, what can I do for you? But the problem there is a contradiction. Because the greatest thing God can do for us is to make us like him. But if that's the case, we can't. So in some way, he enables us to create just for that choice. And that's what removes Nabadik Sufa. You see, we now have been granted a divine attribute. And what is that? To be a true cause. Isn't that astounding? Right. Now you may say, wait a minute. What do you mean? We don't create. Even if I have free will, I can't bring something into existence. Even if I could even if I could bring my will, my choice into existence, but then it stops. I can't go beyond that. So how does it work? And the answer is very interesting. What do we do when we make the choice? We don't actually create. We cause, but not existence, because we don't have a yad. We don't have a hand. You know what we cause? The movement of God. If we do the right thing, God's will, then he gets closer to us. And that proximity to us actually creates existence in something. If we sin, which goes against his will, then he distances himself from us, And that allows the entry of evil, you see, to bring bad into the world. So what we create is the proximity of God to what we want to do. So He creates, but we have free will in that determines His movement. Isn't that interesting? That's what we do. We cause His movement, which means not that we force Him to move closer or far away. You see, what we do is He voluntarily moves depending on our acts. But He'll only voluntarily move based on what we do. So in that sense, we cause. Because if we sin, He move away. If we don't sin, we do the mitzvah, He will move toward us, and that translates itself into action itself. So two things happen. We actually create a choice that didn't exist before and is not placed there by God, but what does it is God's proximity, close or away. You see, that He voluntarily does exactly to what our free choice was. Isn't that interesting? You see how it works? Right. So that's how things are done. Does God get what's called ha'oras yichudai, where His oneness, His being gets closer to us, to our neshama, and that creates all kinds of good in however He works things. And if we sin, He distances Himself from us, and that allows the Satan to enter the absence of God, and he can now do things that God allows him to do, actually gives him the existence to do. And that's how it's done. So it's true that we don't do the actions, but we do have free choice, and that is divine. There is nothing in creation that can do that, you see. And that's why Naaman Iksufa does not exist. You see? Very, very important. And now you begin to understand what Tselem Elokim really is, the image of God. We are in the likeness of God, literally, because we can cause, truly, that nothing else can cause. No other creature has that ability, right? You see. And that is the origin of justice, Midas Hadin. You see? Because He wants us to feel like a somebody. And that's dinam, that's justice. You do it, you deserve it. You do this, you don't deserve it, then you have to undo what you do. So it comes out something which is fascinating. Okay? That when you suffer, why are you suffering? That suffering is not that God is making you suffer. You caused that suffering. That suffering is a creation that you caused because of your choice. And therefore you need to undo the suffering. How? By the opposite of pleasure, which is pain. You see? And also the recognition that if you are in pain, you must be a nobody. And that undoes the fantasy where you think you're somebody because you sinned. You see? So it comes out an incredible thing. All the suffering that mankind experiences, they caused. It's not that God said, well, let me think about what I want to do. No, that is their creation, the suffering. Because the suffering demands, in order to undo that creation, you have to undo the creation by choosing to do evil, you see. So it comes out that the suffering that you go through is your fault. And it's exactly, precisely what you did. You see? It's incredible how exacting all of this is like. You see, you know, if you really think about it, is there a physical law in physics that is justice? Right? And there is. You ever hear of Newton's third law of motion? For every action that you do, there's an opposite and equal reaction. That's justice. There's no such thing, since you have been granted a likeness of God, where you can do something that has no repercussions. There's no such thing. And that's the concept of dinam, justice. Midas hadin, right. In order to make you feel like a God, you need to be responsible for everything you do. And therefore, when the time comes for reward, you will not experience the shame of having the godlike nature at one shot and one side, right, and doing nothing for eternity. You won't experience that. You see, in any case, and now we understand something else. If I ask you, well, is there anything that interferes with justice? And the answer is yes. Rachamim. God saw, and this is the beginning of Bereshis, God saw that mankind will never do it. They're going to wind up creating, a lot more negative things than positive things. And they'll never make it to the end, because even to get to Olam Haba requires a threshold. So they'll never make it. So he introduced the concept of mercy. What is mercy? Mercy is the suspension of justice. Really, you did something, so the repercussions are exact. Justice. You know what I'm saying? So God said they'll never make it. So I have to introduce the suspension of justice, right? So I won't punish them, which means I will not allow them to be godlike, where they have to receive the repercussions of their actions. God interferes with your likeness of being God. If you think about it, that's really what's happening. You see, but he had to do it because he realized that the world cannot subscribe to such a severe subscription and so on. So he interferes with you being a God and saying, no, I'm not going to punish you. Maybe you'll have a chance to do tshuva. Hey, but wait a minute. You're taking away my ability to be God. Because godlike means that whatever I do is created. So God says, yeah, but I have to do it for the sake of my world to exist and get the future world. So God, Rachamim, is an interference in justice. And more than that, it's an interference in you being godlike. And now you understand the Chazal, that it says that tzaddikim, they don't want Rachamim. They want God to deal with them kechut asayro, like a hair's breadth. They want exactly what I did is what I want you to do to me. I don't want mercy. I don't want compassion. If I did it, I deserve it. I have to undo it. Why do they want that? Because they don't want to experience Rachamim. They want to experience being godlike in Olam Haba totally. Because you're going to get something in Olam Haba that you don't deserve, right, in order to exist in the Olam Haba. You see? And they don't want anything that they don't deserve. Nothing. Now, obviously, it's very hard. You know what it is to have the repercussions on everything you did and to be punished for it and so on. Very, very difficult. You see? But that's what tzaddikim want. They want to get what they deserve. They do not want to get what they don't. And they don't deserve rachamim because it's an interference in being godlike. So therefore, it's very important, right? And now we understand why dinam, justice, is so critical in God's eyes. Because it's the only thing that will remove namadik sufa. You see, right? It's the only thing that will remove namadik sufa, right? And therefore, God is very strict because we don't want to have really, in a certain sense, although we can't prevent it, we don't want to have an iota of not being godlike in the future world. Because guess what? Because that comes along with namadik sufa, bread of shame. It comes along with that terrible feeling of receiving that which you don't deserve, which means I am not God. Now we don't know what namadik sufa is. We don't know what the neshama feels. We don't know what it is to be divine. We don't want a chelik and a kaimimal. We don't even know what free will is. We don't know anything. So basically, in the language that we do know, whatever, I've tried to explain one of the most mysterious ideas in all of Judaism. The Hashkafa of why did God do this? Why do I have to earn my reward? Why don't you just give me the gift? I don't mind receiving it. But that's the problem. Yeah, you don't mind receiving it as long as you're not divine in nature. But if you are divine in nature, which means that you will receive the greatest pleasure of all, and we don't know that either, how and so on, believe me, you're going to mind it. If I allow you just to experience 1 minute of being divine, you're going to say, I don't want to receiving something I didn't do. It's like feeling shame. How long could you tolerate shame? Right? You don't want it for 1 minute. You don't want it for 10 seconds. Right? The only reason why we could tolerate and receive gifts is because we do not know our divine nature. That's why we can tolerate receiving things for free. We don't want welfare, right? That's basically what it is. It's a welfare mentality. We can only experience a welfare mentality because we don't know what any of this stuff really is. But in the end, in Olam Haba, believe me, we will know what all of this is. And in the end, we're going to say to God, thank you for giving me a reward that I can truly enjoy, because I realize that everything that happens to me in the future world is only because I caused it. And it's not a freebie, right? And that's why I can enjoy it for eternity. Anyway, in any case, these are not easy concepts. But it's worth it to give some kind of handle on what in the world is going on. Because if you think about it, the greatest and most important decision God ever made was that you have to work for Olam Haba. Because like I said, there are people that will not get Olam Haba, or there are people that will get Olam Haba in a severely diminished way. But listen, God knows best, and He decided that He does not want that. If He was going to make you divine in nature, then He's got to give you a task. And of course, we know what the task is to do the mitzvahs, to get close to God, right? And that's the task. And we will therefore receive a reward we have no idea what it's like. Like the Gemara says, Ayin lo yiraso, the eye has never beheld what is stored for the righteous in the future world. Because the future world is a place that you have to be divine. It's appropriate for a divine being called the neshama, the zulosoi, the other that God created. That's what Olam Haba really is. In fact, the neshama, the soul, is so great that it needs a special place, right, in order for the neshama to reside in and experience this unbelievable reward that hopefully will come very, very soon. Thank you.